Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Bytes. I'm your host, Max Bowen. In this episode, I welcome back friend of the show and author Jay Lee for his new book, Coach's Corner, out on October 14th. The book is set in a rural town of 1,500 people in the summer of 1997. Charlie's best friend, Barry Ray, has just been arrested for murder, but Charlie is convinced of his friend's innocence. So he sets out to find out what happens, and what he learns will change him forever. In this episode, we're going to talk about how the setting of the book and Charlie as a protagonist really shifts the story. Jay Lee talks about what's next for him as a writer and the new things he got to try out. All right. Well, Jay Lee, first off, it is great to have you back on the show. It has been a little while. I think this is now your third or fourth time on the program.
Yeah, I really appreciate the invitation, Max. Thanks a lot for having me back. It's always a great time.
Of course, of course. And of course, this is all about your new book, Coach's Corner, out on October 14th. So, really, as of this recording, we're not even a week away. But to kind of open this, now you are no stranger to like book releases. Does it ever get old?
That's a great question. I honestly thought kind of going into this one that I had a handle on the publication process. And, every time you think you've got a handle on something, you find out that you really don't. It's been entirely exciting, but there's been lots of little challenges that have popped up. Amazon changed their pre-publication policy, had some issues getting the cover finalized. The editing process is always fun. So while that adds a lot of extra work, it also keeps the fire in the belly, and it really at no point in the process felt old or mundane. I've been very, very excited, and I'm really looking forward to the big day.
All right. Well, then let us dive right into the story. Walk us through what Coach's Corner is all about.
So at its heart, what it's really about is right and wrong, and more to the point, how right and wrong can be a matter of perspective. It tells the story through the eyes of a young adult, essentially, a roughly 20-something-year-old who experiences the summer that he'll never forget, where his very good friend is arrested for a murder. And it's amplified by the fact that it all takes place in a very small town in southern Illinois, not too distant from the town that I grew up in. And it's also set back in the late 90s. So there was no social media back then. There was no instant answers on Google. And it tells the story of how this protagonist, his name is Charlie, as he goes about trying to exonerate or prove to himself that his friend is innocent, that he learns how much a matter of perspective right and wrong is. And without giving away too much of it, he ultimately is forced to confront, his preconceptions of what the right thing to do is, what the wrong thing to do is. And it's told through the eyes of someone who doesn't have a lot of adult experience. And that was done very intentionally to kind of give a fresh perspective. So in that regard, it's very unique and different from the other four books that I've previously published. And in a lot of ways, it's much more symbolic and emotional than some of the other books as well. So it was a lot of fun to write, and I'm really excited to hear what people have to say about it, because it is a bit of a deviation from the first four books that I've published.
Definitely, definitely. And I really got the vibe of like a small town, rural America. Like this is a town with a population of like 1,500 people. It's the kind of thing where everyone knows everyone else. What kind of inspired this particular location? And did you have to do any like research to kind of learn what life is like in a town like this?
Yeah, so the inspiration, honestly, there's a lot of personal narrative in this story. I spent my formative years in a town that was just over 1,000 people. There was no stoplight, no fast food. Very similar, actually, in terms of the setting and the type of things that people would do. Like, for instance, since there's no place to go really, teenagers would hang out at the local car wash. They would cruise the strip, driving up and down the same, 2 mile stretch, would see the same cars go back and forth 50 times in the course of the night. And I sort of lived that and I saw that and I contrast that to living in a more metropolitan area like the Chicago area or in the suburbs. And it's very different and it offers a lot of advantages in my opinion, but it also offers some drawbacks. So I really wanted to try to capture that for the story. And I really leaned on some personal experience. But that said, the research component of all of my books is pretty significant. And I've actually felt really honored. Writer's Digest actually asked me to write an article about research and how I approach it. And really, there's two different types of research that I've encountered in my writing. There's big picture research, which basically focuses on the central themes. Do they make sense? Are they applicable? Are they relatable? But then there's also the nitty gritty, which is the details behind the settings. What does this town look like? What are these intersections? What does it look like, smell like, feel like to be here? And I did a fair amount of research in both cases. The fact that it's set in 1997 and tells the story of a crime that was committed some time ago, the laws have changed, the rules have changed, people's perception of this crime or that crime have changed. And so trying to essentially hop in the time machine and go back 30 years, 30 years or so, it was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of work because it's really important to me that the writing be authentic. People take some of their valuable time, their valuable money. They decide to read a story. They want to be entertained. They should be entertained factually. And so capturing that small town vibe, but particularly told through the eyes of a 20-year-old in the past, provided a lot of opportunities for some challenging research. And I really enjoyed it, but it was by no means easy.
Oh no, definitely, definitely. And I really thought you like captured the vibe of Charlie really well, like his whole world. He's like still like very young. Like comparing this to the Hubley case, your first book, Charlie's way over his head. He's like no way capable of investigating this murder, but he does it anyway. And I want to ask about how that kind of frames the book, where your protagonist is this very young person who has this very, I think, like simplistic kind of view of the world.
Yeah. Such an excellent question because it really did drive not only some of the character decisions, but also to a degree the plot. Because when you think about it, the Ben Seabird protagonist of the first book, The Hubley Case, and the sequel, The Silent Cardinal, is a trained Marine whose experience in combat situations, anti-surveillance, and addressing terrorist threats, he is more or less in his element. He might not like it, he might not want to be in it, but he's been trained. So there's a certain degree of muscle and mind memory when it comes to those situations. And that allows him to go down a certain path when he's trying to dig up clues to solve a mystery. In stark contrast, you have Charlie, who not only doesn't have the experience, but he also doesn't have the age. He's still, you can't call him a kid. He's a young adult, right? He is an adult. He's of the adult age. He's graduated from high school, but he doesn't have a lot of the experiences. If people think about the course of their life, a lot happens in your 20s. A lot happens that you learn from. It shapes you. It gives you perspective. And it helps shape who you are as a 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old. Well, Charlie hasn't had any of those experiences. So he's suddenly thrust in this situation where he's not been trained, but he also just hasn't lived through the experiences that many of us had. And that reshapes how he approaches this mystery. I mean, his good friend gets hauled away in handcuffs, and all of a sudden he's trying to figure out why. He starts to catch a whiff of some corruption, and then he gets threatened. And his reaction to that kind of a threat is going to be different than what a Marine's reaction would be to the same threat. So telling the story through Charlie's lens, it made it really, really unique and fun, but it also made it hard because in some respects, it would have been a lot easier for him to just somehow miraculously outwit these guys or call on his training to outmaneuver them. He can't do that. The audience wouldn't accept that because it's not realistic. So as the author, you get to think through, well, what would he do? And how could you plausibly explain one step to the next? The more you think about it and the more you start to connect those dominoes, the more fun and difficult it becomes. And that was a big part of the writing journey for this book. That's a long-winded answer to a relatively short question, but that's the honest truth.
I like the long answers here. I love this stuff. So let's talk about connecting the dots. So this is a very complicated, complex story. It's not just A to B to C to D. There's a lot of twists and turns here. There's a lot of secrets that get revealed. Did this thing require a lot of careful planning, or were you able to just like pants your way through it?
Hmm. Well, I'll sort of answer it with an expression that I was told one time that sometimes a person's greatest strength can also be a weakness. And with me in the writing, sometimes I can get almost too complex. But I love intricate stories. I want there to be lots of twists and turns, and I like to keep the audience on its toes. I get a lot of feedback from readers who tell me that they don't see endings coming, they love this red herring, they love that misdirection over there, they're harbingers. When I read it the second time, I realized all the things I missed. Like, that's music to my ears as a writer, right? To be able to provide that kind of enjoyment to the readers. But to answer your question, there's absolutely no way that I would be able to do that without meticulously planning the whole story out. I actually know authors, I know thriller authors who sit down with a blank page and just start writing. They just start typing. And the pages turn into chapters and the chapters turn into a book, and they've got all this great description and plot twist, and they never outlined a single thing. And I have to say, to a certain extent, I'm a little jealous of them because I would love to be able to do that. To me, it's a discipline that I don't actually let myself start writing chapter one until I have the outline done. It doesn't have to be complete to the third decimal, but I do have to know the beginning, the middle, and the end, and several of the twists and turns along the way, or I just end up wasting a whole lot of time. So this book was 78,000 words, and it was essentially a 25-page outline before I got to type any one of those words. And I don't know any other way that I myself would be able to write this book, even though I sometimes wish that I could.
Did you stick to your own plan, or did you find yourself as you went along realizing, wait a minute, this is a better idea, this is a better scene, or even this is a better ending?
So that's my favorite part of the whole writing process, actually, is when I get a chance to deviate from the outline. I don't stray too far from the general idea or the general plot. I don't radically do this or that, but certainly you don't want the outline to limit your creativity and take away from your flexibility either. So what I try to do is I try to give myself enough general guidance in the outline where I know what each chapter has to accomplish, and I kind of know how I want it to segue into the next chapter. But I try not to get too granular in the outline, because when you're actually writing the chapter, having that freedom to be able to deviate here and there and put a little twist even to your own outline, that's an extremely liberating feeling. I suppose that some people would hear me say that and say that's what you do for fun, is deviate from your outline. That's some wild child you are there, Jay Lee. But it's true. Like, I need the outline to give me a framework, but my favorite thing to do is as I go about writing the actual story, look for those little twists and turns within the outline itself. And I do get the opportunity to do that quite a bit. And usually as long as I come back to the outline and I kind of revisit the truth that I've outlined before I start the story, I can take those little twists and turns without having to do a whole bunch of rework. It's backfired on me in the past, but in the end, the pros still outweigh the cons because that's a part of what makes writing fun.
All right. Now, as we mentioned before, not your first book. Did you get the chance to try anything new, whether it's new kinds of characters or storytelling methods?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple of them we've already touched on, right? The fact that it's set in 1997, right? It's set in a world that a lot of us who were around back then, it's almost kind of hard to remember what it was like when you didn't have Google at your fingertips, right? I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about some baseball game that was played, and we were remembering it differently, right? I was remembering this way, that he was remembering that way, and within seconds, you pull out the phone, you can remind yourself, what the right way is. Well, bring it back to the mid '90s, late '90s. People were still going to the library and looking at microfiche. Encyclopedia Britannica was still one of the number one selling books out there. The internet, the World Wide Web, really only became available to the general public in 1995. Email was just starting to take off. So you didn't have social media, you didn't have Google, you didn't have the high speed connection. Everybody, you can remember the dial up sound on the modems. So writing a story that is rooted in mystery and has a protagonist trying to figure out different pieces of the puzzle back in that time was a fundamental shift from anything that I had written previously. A lot of my earlier books, the first four books, actually incorporate some technology that hasn't even been officially released yet, right? It's in trial phase at this or that, and so you're talking about an almost futuristic perspective of technology, and how does a protagonist who's trained to use that sort of stuff use that to his advantage? Well, this is the exact opposite. Charlie, relative to someone in today's thriller novel, today's mystery novel, Charlie is handicapped because he doesn't have those tools. So writing the story in the past was a real change. Writing the story from a 20-year-old perspective was a change. And then, this story, the third big change was all my other novels had what I would call grand repercussions. There was a global thermonuclear threat, there was, a terrorist attack, and there were sort of these large scale, potentially high casualty situations that the protagonist had to go save the day or try to save the day. If you haven't read the books, I don't want to spoil the ending, but that kind of made it on a grander scale with these big sweeping repercussions. This story has just as much tension, if not more, because it's so personal, but it's very localized. It's localized to a small town murder mystery. I mean, there's people in other parts of the country aren't necessarily going to be as affected by this as they would be by the plot line of some of the earlier books. But in a lot of ways, that didn't reduce the tension or the threat. It just made it more personal, because now in this story, more than any of the others, I feel like my hope, I should say, and what I've heard from people who have read the book is that they feel much more tangibly connected to the main character than they have in previous books, because it's a localized issue. It's someone who's not specially trained, someone who's in this local small type setting, and it hopefully captures an even more personal element. But relative to the other books, those three things really made it a fundamentally different kind of story even though it all falls within the mystery suspense genre.
Okay. All right. So as of this recording, we are less than a week away from the big day, the big release, the books going out there. What's your plan, Jay? Are you going to be doing like a tour? Do you have like signings lined up?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. So I always have a little launch party, just a celebration with some of the readers and friends, and we've got a couple of splashes out there. I've actually been one of the things that I've been kind of focusing on this year is I've gotten a lot of questions from aspiring authors and other people in the industry, and it's actually prompted a revamp to my website, jleethrillers.com, where there's now more of an emphasis on the sort of industry advice aspect. And I've got a lot of shorts up there. I got a brand new YouTube page, brand new LinkedIn page, a bunch of different things that are all sort of angled towards that professional aspect because I've had some experience and I've had people ask me questions, and I really love to try to help people where I can. And if authors have questions and people in the community want to know, well, what was this experience like or that experience, I want to provide that. So bringing it back to your question about launch day, I've got a few shorts planned tied back to some of the industry advice and some partnership stuff. But on the actual day, it's sort of a little superstition of mine. I've got some OCD in me. On the actual day, I unplug for a period of time and try to just go for a walk in nature and just disconnect from the world for a little bit. It's always a special day. I come right back to it, the very next day, and the inboxes are full, and the text messages and the voicemails are piling up. But publishing a book is a lot of fun. It's a lot of work though, and so
Mm.
I kind of reward myself. I've done it since the first book, where I just sort of take some of the time that day and I just sort of disconnect and spend a little bit of time with some loved ones and a little bit of time by myself. And I'm really looking forward to just sort of a low key disconnected day because it has been intense.
I like that. And I think that more writers should probably do that actually, just to take a day off to like walk away because you can't just like sit by your computer and wait for emails to pop in, wait for text messages to pop in because that kind of like drives you crazy. Since you kind of brought it up, Jay, I do want to ask, what is your advice for someone if they were to come to you and say, I have an idea for a book, but where do I begin? Like, what is step one?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking. That's a great question. And I've had the opportunity to answer that question a number of times, and I would say that it starts with, what is it that you want to do? If you're if you have this idea in your head, and you want to know how do I get started, and I had the opportunity to sit across the table from you and have a glass of wine or a Guinness or something, and just talk about it, the first thing that I would say is, well, what do you really want to do? And you don't have to have the detailed answer, but if your answer was, for example, well, I just want to publish a book. I don't care about doing it for a living. I don't necessarily intend to write another one. I just always had this idea, and I'd love to to get a book out there somehow, and I have to get a book written in order to get it out there. Um, that would lend a different answer than if it was someone who said, no, I've always wanted to write, and I've wanted writing to be my occupation, and that's how I'd like to approach it. The 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 way that they would go about getting from A to whatever Z is would be different depending on what their goal is. But in terms of how do you actually get that first draft, my personal advice is try to map out, if you have an idea and you think that it's a full flushed out idea that you're ready to start putting pen and paper on, write down in like 10 pages what the flow of it is. Don't worry about grammar, don't worry about getting every detail right. Just map out the skeleton of the idea, and that will tell you when you go through that process. As much as I don't necessarily enjoy the outlining process. If you go through that process, you will get an answer to the question, do I really have an idea, or do I just have an idea for an idea, right? That's how I would start. And if you can honestly, from A to Z, with a few steps in between, say, this is the story that I'd like to do, then my honest advice to people has been, pick a day, block it off in your calendar, and just sit down at the computer and start. Because I've heard lots of different pieces of advice from lots of really, really great authors. And I've talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different styles. Like I said, some people can just start typing, others need to outline it. Some people write at night, some people write in the morning, some people like music, some people like it, with complete silence. The one commonality, the one thing that every single author that I have talked to has always said is you got to spend some time in your story every day. That's it. You don't have to do it the same way. You don't have to do it and I know some people like to type, people want to use handwritten notes for their first draft. None of that really matters, but dedicating some time in the day, each day, to your story is something that all of these authors share. Every single one of them. And I've talked to well over a couple hundred. And the answer is always the same. You can have all that variation, but at the end of the day, writers write. You got to spend some time in the story and just start trying. Turn it into a routine. And you will psychologically and physically, you will adapt to that routine. I read somewhere that it takes 28 days to break a habit and it takes 17 days to form one. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the science behind all that is, but do it for a couple of weeks, whether you want to or not. If you say to yourself, I want to write a story, then commit for 3 weeks to write 30 to 60 minutes a day, no matter how you feel. Sit down and write, and do it at the same time. Do it at a time when you're at your creative best. And by the end of that third week, most people would start to feel a rhythm. And they'd start, if they wanted to continue the story, they'd start to actually look forward to that time. That's how I started. Trust me, very few people wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning just for fun to sit down and write for an hour and a half. But you do it enough times, at the time that suits your schedule and your personality best, and you make it a part of your routine, and it will start to feel more natural, and it will get easier to do it. But you've got to make the commitment. If you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. But make sure that you give it a shot every day. That's another long-winded answer to a very good short question.
All right. Well, folks, we are coming down to the end of this conversation, but we're going to end it the same way we always do, and that is, Jay Lee, what's next?
So I always like to have a couple irons in the fire. I do have another Seabird novel in the works, and I also have another standalone story that I've been tinkering with. My hope is that, in the next couple of months, there might be some exciting stuff to share. But I love to write, and as I've gotten older and time has pulled at me in more ways, it has become more of a discipline and a focus on doing it. But I'm really excited to continue writing, and I've been really excited about jleethrillers.com. There's been a lot of really cool interaction through that site. I'd love to continue to do that and offer people my perspective. And if it helps them, outstanding. But I would love to continue to do this for the long term, and I've got a couple of projects in the works to do so. But I really appreciate your asking, Max. That's really nice of you to ask.
All right. Well, folks, we are coming down to the end of the show. Now, we've given you all the information. Now, here's what you do. You go to jleethrillers.com. We said it 4 times now, I think. So you got it there. If you haven't already done so, pre-order your copy of Coach's Corner out on October 14th. And once you get it, folks, leave reviews. Leave your comments. We want to know what you thought about the book. Do you have a favorite scene, a favorite character? What did you think about the ending? We want to know all these things. And thank you once again, Jay Lee. I love having you on the show. Appreciate this.
It's an honor and a privilege. Thanks again for having me, Max.
Okay. And to the folks at home, thank you once again for checking this show out. I'm your host, This has been Citywide Bytes. I'm your host, Max Ball. There we go. We got it right. I'll see you all next time.